right, hey everyone. Thanks for coming out. Let's kick things off with the hardest hitting question of the day. Introduce yourself.
All right, my name is Michael Lewellen. I've been in the crypto space for like 10 years, spent 4 years at Open Zeppelin. During that time, spent a lot of time on Oracle security problems, including working on Compound and still continue to advise them, and now at Turnkey doing embedded wallets and key management.
Hi, Bogdan, one of the co-founders and CTO at Tenderly. Tenderly is a Web3 infrastructure and tooling platform. Most DeFi teams, or most people, I think, except Turnkey, actually use us on this particular panel.
We're talking about this afterwards.
Yeah. But anyway, if you have anything that's not working on chain, you're probably using us to solve it.
I'm Marc. I contribute to the Pyth network, a decentralized blockchain oracle. Mostly just like talking about market data, and it's been 5 years already, so it's pretty sad, but I guess it's the job.
And I'm Brenda, Loya. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Tellor. My background is in economics, and I guess I just continue to provide data, just in a different way.
Hey everyone, I am Carson Brown. I'm a product manager at Gauntlet, working on vault strategies. So yeah. And I have an interface with oracles a lot. I think everyone does. Cool. All right. Let's kick things off. All right. Secure, high frequency, oracles. Just for everyone in the group, if we can go down the line, what do you think is the most vulnerable piece of the Oracle supply chain?
I think it goes down to the basics because as we've seen over and over again, generally the oracles are not. The Oracle protocol itself doesn't get hacked. Usually the attacks happen on the liquidity side or the data definition side of the asset. And I think that is the weakest link because it's the most subjective and the most dependent on people's sentiment.
I mean, you hit it bullseye because it's half the time it's not so much Oracle malfunction attack. Sometimes it's bad implementation, but that's, I guess, 1% of any Oracle-related issues. It's very much market. Like it's compared to TradFi, which we had just before. Apple stock's not going to get delisted. Like it trades, you have laws that it can always trade at this price, the SIP price. It's super liquid. You don't have pump and dump. You don't have people withdrawing liquidity. Everything, arguably. And one thing I actually mentioned is many kind of say, oh, Oracle malfunction here. Sometimes it's the market. Sometimes it's the Oracle that doesn't price properly, but sometimes you just price what the market says the asset is at. And one thing we heard before is like some assets shouldn't trade at 1 million. Maybe, but I think it's also, I'm kind of anti-guardrails, to be fair. Because just putting rules on top of, safety rules on top of things, you're just going to introduce other assumptions. So you should just do your best, but in pricing and also in how you implement. So it's, yeah, liquidity vanishing, going from one pool to another pool. And one big, I think, mistake and thing I tell to a lot of token issuer, whether it's stables or whatnot, it's just don't fragment liquidity. Like, first, you have 1 million to LP in some pool, don't go on 10 chain. Because if you have 10 pools at 100K liquidity, it's just bad. 1 week it's there, the next week is there. So it's, yeah, market, like where TradFi is ahead is how they manage markets. And it'd be easier, like the Pyth Oracle, we have 800 US equities price feed. We don't have much, if at all, issue with this. It's not the Oracle fault, it's usually more the market-related stuff.
I'm the worst one to speak about this. No, I can talk about how people can make sure that what the guarantees they put in place work, and we're going to talk about it a bit later. I think the biggest security issue is educational. What I mean by this is people implementing the Oracle not realizing. I also feel weird after engineer for 15 minutes. He talked literally about the answer to this question, so it's weird to talk about this after him. But not understanding what's happening in the background. We had situations, I think it was for Uniswap V2, if I recall correctly, of people using the price Oracle from that. And they were like, why did you use this? Like, we never intended this to be used by anyone else. So I think most of the security stuff that happens is because people don't understand what they're integrating, not as much as the Oracle itself. Because the Oracle itself is a fairly, as you mentioned, I can't remember an Oracle bug, like a bug, actual bug happening in the past 6 years or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think, to add to everything that's already been said, like, I think the biggest problem is that it's really hard to do failover. Like, you basically have to just pick an oracle and just trust it. Like, we had something on Compound years ago where, and this was before my time, so I can't take credit for this, what turned out to be a bad idea, but it sounded good in theory, which was, okay, no one really trusts Uniswap v3 oracles regularly, but we're going to trust Chainlink because that's the biggest provider that was functioning at the time, still the biggest provider for Compound. So if Chainlink ever misbehaves, we can compare it against the Uniswap v4 price, and then we'll just, or actually it was v2 at the time, and then we upgraded to v3. Another story. But basically, we realized that every time that system was triggered, and when it was triggered, it would basically say, we're not going to update the price until it comes back in equilibrium. Every single time it was the Uniswap price oracle that was out of sync, and Chainlink was doing just fine during times of volatility. And that eventually bit us in the butt when, of all the tokens listed on Compound, it was the Uni token that ended up having like a 40% spike in one day because of a talk about like a fee switch turning on. And that meant that the market basically could not be updated for like 20, 30 minutes while the Uniswap pool itself was so far out of sync. So we eventually completely deprecated this functionality, but like that taught us like having good failover or having like oracles compared to other oracles like just doesn't work in practice. You're creating more complexity, you're actually creating more security risk as a result. So in practice, you just have to go with like your intuition is, I don't want to have to trust one vendor. I want to have like options. I want it to be decentralized, for lack of a better word. But with oracles, it's actually better, I think, in my opinion, especially if going to the managed service, is to pick one provider who's just very, very good at being available and being accurate, and just like working very closely with them. You can still potentially come up with failover strategies, but you have to be super sophisticated about it, and that's usually something the vast majority of teams are not capable of.
Thanks. So Bogdan, question for you. I'm a regular Tenderly user, I will say. Use all the features. And you're a very popular product in the simulation space. And I've found one of the hardest things with oracles or simulating transactions on chain is you're always simulating the oracle price at a time. As we're seeing increased frequency in oracles, that we're seeing more on-chain contracts that respond to oracle price changes. I know you have automation tooling as well. How do you kind of enable simulation and kind of smart automations built on Tenderly for oracles that might not be as easily predictable?
Yeah. So it's interesting. We started working on, we have a virtual testness product which lets you fork a chain and then you can sync the underlying state. And we thought it's so super cool that whenever a new block gets added, for example, to Ethereum mainnet, your staging environment gets updated. We update the whole world, and it's so cool. People literally just care about oracle prices. I'm not even kidding, because like I think that we could have shipped the features 6 months earlier, but just syncing like Chainlink, Pyth, and like Tellor, and like all 15, 20 that exist in the world, and that would have been it, and an easier engineering problem to do as well. But yeah, most of the stuff is, I think testnets are broken because there you usually don't have correct prices, or stuff is like very screwed up. So one part of simulating is either if you're using Foundry, your tests with Anvil have to be very quick because you fork the chain and you have a few seconds until while the prices are still up to date, and then they go out of date, and then that's not valid anymore. So I mean, that's why I'm ready to die on a hill to say virtual tests are the best thing since sliced bread for testing. And that's one, but I think also a lot of people coming back to, I mean, not just your point, everyone's point. When you pick an oracle provider, you kind of pick to be delusional. What I mean by delusional is like you trust them, and when they're delusional, you need to believe that's true, because like you talked about all of the issues that can happen there. What they still haven't seen from our user base is actually simulating these disaster scenarios. Like, how do I know that I'm delusional? So first of all, detecting that I'm incorrect, because it's so hard, because who's right in this situation? Both of them in their worldview. And that's the thing that people aren't actually looking into. At least I don't see it in our user base. And then the second one is, what do you do in that disaster scenario? Do you like have a circuit breaker where you just pause your whole market because you have no idea what's happening? Or do you like increase the risk, or whatever the situation is? So we don't see that type of, let's call it chaos engineering at all. But we do see people, again, I think it's our most used product literally just because oracles exist and testnets are shit. Sorry for cursing.
No, I agree. That's why I love Tenderly. You guys are seeing things ahead of time. For Marc and Brenda, though, I guess some questions for you guys. How do you establish that trust? Because I think a lot of what we're talking about here is, you pick an oracle provider, you're essentially like locking in a long-term relationship with them. They're hard to swap out. How do you establish that trust in that will respond to these scenarios in ways that will keep you safe or maybe not keep you safe. You know, maybe it's accurate and you just weren't safe in the first place. Yeah, how do you kind of navigate that?
And being there for a long time, I mean, when Pyth was launched, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, like the classic, no one's get fired, not for picking IBM, but picking Chainlink stuff. So you kind of have to wait, prove yourself, or bring something completely new that no one else provides. So, for example, Pyth became very successful initially on Solana, and then on EVM 3 years ago, let's say, when it was all the perp dex kind of meta, even before Hyperliquid, was a completely new method where it brings tons of value, where you're like, okay, I might have less trust in them, but they can actually make my protocol come to fruition, make it work. Rather, like, for example, I started DeFi, I was trading synths, so it wasn't even perps on synthetics. It was like pushed updates from Chainlink every 1 hour for Tesla. Like, front running was terrible. It was the worst experience trading ever. Luckily, or I don't want to say we were intelligent early, was bringing the pull oracle on demand, where whenever you need a price update, you can do it. And we were the first one. So you can like minimize the trust level by bringing something completely new, and perp dexes, like from 3 years in, anything oracle based, most were using Pyth. Just because of this value of, all right, my perp dex doesn't stink anymore. And of course, after it's continuous, don't fuck up, because as mentioned, it's always, like, hindsight is hell of a drug. It's very, oh yeah, why did they do this, etc. But I think there's also the many shit happens that you don't end up seeing, that somehow oracles haven't completely messed up. And after just it's bringing value to the user, support, etc. So it's, you can't manufacture trust. You'll just have time and work to speak for it. But in the meantime, you can grow your user base and further accelerate this trust by just like, all right, I'll help you build a protocol.
Brenda, anything from you on that one? Okay. Cool. Michael, I know, so Turnkey, you guys wallet infrastructure, you kind of sit in the middle of off-chain preferences turning into on-chain execution. And often those preferences are based on data. And how do you guys end up kind of making that trade-off from a user perspective where they might have some automation or maybe some parameterized execution? How do you decide, are we taking off-chain information, because again, you are able to pass that through, or are we going to use on-chain information instead? And what drives that decision?
So right now, I would say we punt it in our design. We have a very low-level primitive design, so we built it very API-driven, and it's generally, we're very policy-oriented towards transactions, so we don't really look at on-chain state, but we look at the transaction itself. We say, like, does this match, one, you know, because all of our keys live in secure enclaves with end-to-end authentication, so we think, is this person authorized to use this private key to sign something? Are there any policies around, like, what they can sign, which smart contracts they can interact with, which chains they can interact with, et cetera. But there's more things we're seeing now, and we're just now like releasing this like as of a week or two ago, so it's early days, but we're now extending the secure enclave environment, the infrastructure we built, to let other people deploy it. So what we've seen people do is do their own transaction parsing, and in some cases ingest their own data, which could include on-chain state, into that, and figure out how to aggregate it and come up with like good answers that will then basically tell you, should I send this transaction or not, or what should be in the content. So one example of that is we're talking to like a marketplace that's trying to do something like prediction markets. They're taking a lot of different inputs. They're currently entirely on chain, but they're like, how do we want to bring this off chain because we want to have more control over it, but we still want to be trusted. We still want to be able to prove that what we're doing is correct. So my long-winded answer there is, like, I would say we're agnostic on that, but we're trying to give people the option to create whatever logic they want, and then allow them to be able to bring in external state that could be on chain, which is fairly easy to validate, or it could be off chain, in which case you can use, you know, things like TLS to verify that it's come from the right source, that's authorized, and then you can create whatever flow you want. And then how you create that flow, we're literally working through those problems right now. So I don't have a good answer on what the best practice ends up looking like, but we expect to see that in production within a couple months to see for sure.
Nice. I know, again, topic for this panel is secure high-frequency oracles. generally I would think high frequency and secure are kind of at odds with each other, where secure means decentralized. Decentralized means slow. So how do you kind of balance secure and high frequency in an oracle? And how much high frequency is too much? Like, do you really, if you're paying, you know, out the wazoo to have high frequency data, are you seeing enough demand for that amount of granularity? How do you identify that balance? Brenda, you can kick off with you.
I think that you don't balance it, you just make the trade-off, to be very, very honest. One of the reasons TradFi is able to have high-frequency trading, it's because their ultimate fallback is very robust. They operate in a closed system, and you can always have a lawsuit. And it might take years to resolve, but it's a closed system. They do KYC, and they know who to go after. When you're in real DeFi, I'm not saying when you're in between CeFi, if you're in CeFi or something similar with plenty of controls, you might not be able to get out of a lawsuit either. But in general, for DeFi, I think that is just a trade-off that you have to consciously make because unfortunately, as we've seen with chains and protocols, we know that rule still applies. And in terms of cost, at least for Tellor, like we can create or we can come to consensus on a lot of information on our own chain, and then we generally just bridge over what's on demand or what's demand of the users, and that helps keep the cost a little bit down. And then that is always a conversation with the user. Is like, how fast do you want it? I'm like, you can have it every block, but that's going to cost you a lot of gas, and that's fine. We can do that. We can relay however fast you want it, but there's a cost associated with that.
How many people pick that option? Is there someone who does like every block on base or something like that?
Not that I know of. And every time that I ask, they go like quiet. They're like, never mind. They actually think about, you know what, I don't need it every second. I found out we only need it like every 4 hours or every hour or whatever. And then we have a conversation about cost.
Yeah, and this is what I'm asking. My intuition says that everybody's like, of course I want this real time. And you're like, sure, $20,000. They're like, every 4 hours.
Yes, that's always how the conversation goes.
So I'll go the exact opposite direction of both of you. Does Citadel feels insecure trading? And regardless of the lawsuit, because it's always ad hoc. DeFi, you can always ad hoc things too, arguably. We've seen it before. Like, actually going slow, you introduce more ways. Like, let's say you update the price every 1 minute at the Oracle level. For 59 seconds in between the first update and the next update, you have a surface area of attack crazy. What if it pumps 10% in that 59 seconds? So, and yeah, Ken Griffin, I don't think is shaking because NASDAQ goes at speed of light. So I think it's just like speed. It requires building differently, like for something to be secure very fast or not. And like you always have, if you have something fast, you can always throttle it at the top. If you have something slow, you can never accelerate it. So let's say you create your ball ending. You don't want like big wick up and down. You could have an oracle produce price every 1 millisecond. So you have tons of data, and you could TWAP it. Rather than if you produce one price every minute, you have one value. So that's arguably, I think, more like a risk for the protocol. So arguably at push, it's not easy, but at push, the faster, the better. After it's how do you use it? And do people need price update at every block? You should work with perp dexes that have 100 perp market that block A, someone trades ETH, trigger ETH price update. Next block BTC, update this price. So it's always based on like demand and use cases. And like Pyth, arguably 80% of our usage is more derivatives protocol because product is well built for this. Where I agree with you is money market, ball lending always, I don't want to pay too much. And arguably no one wants to run infra. So they always, you can just push an update every 1 hour or 1% for me. I sit on my hands. And worst case, if it goes bad, I can kind of pin it on someone else. It's always the Oracle's fault. That's the thing. But so I think it's very like you shouldn't slow things down. Think you'll be more secure. I don't think that's what we try to do.
I don't think that they slow things down. It's just that they once they start thinking about the frequency or the cost, they say, okay, if I only need it every hour, I want it I want to collect the information as close to the hour. There's still always a lag because obviously between collection and relaying, but generally they don't want to use an hour-long Oracle. But then again, we've Maker or Sky, whatever, they always used an hour late Oracle for a very long time for security reasons, and they were still able to grow into this huge entity. They had a couple of hiccups, as we saw with Black Thursday, but they were able to fare fairly okay because they had some extra layers of security in their system.
It's use case, because PubDex, 100x leverage, you cannot tolerate 0.9% price deviation. That's already 90% win. Money market leverage is so low, you can, like LTVs at 90% or whatever, you can tolerate an Oracle updating every 1 second. So yeah, it's to each his own, I guess, but easier to slow down.
It depends on the threat model. Ultimately, depending on which protocol, they're going to have different tolerances for stale prices, and that's something that came up when we did audits opens up, and okay, when we were looking at who's your Oracle provider and what are the assumptions of how they're going to provide data. At the end of the day, that's up to them, and your threat model, hopefully your arrangement with them, exactly what they would be expected to supply. But the frequency, whether it's push or pull, that ultimately came down to okay, what are your tolerances? And with lending markets, it's there's some tolerance, but we do learn that there are certain moments where if someone has the time window to take out debt against something that's mispriced, they absolutely will, and then your market suddenly, essentially losing money, and hopefully has enough reserves to make up for it.
Marc, I guess follow up to what you were saying, because you were using the Citadel example, and it made me think about, on the Oracle side, who is ultimately responsible for the cost of the update? Because ultimately, there's no alpha in having the Oracle price, because the Oracle is updated on chain and everyone can access it. And therefore, it raises this question in a Citadel example, right? Citadel wouldn't update the price unless they knew they could execute something, because actually now everyone else has access to this information. So in that case, in the sense that there's no edge, only then in maybe some OEV, some timing situation, is there a pricing of who pays the bill for the Oracle update issue?
Great question. Oracle or the worst businesses out there. Because as you mentioned, once you push the price on chain, everyone free ride it. And any push Oracle, they pay the gas cost. So usually how does it work? New chain, you go get a big grant, it funds your RPC, it funds your gas costs, you have alerting, you push updates. Pyth works the exact opposite way. It's a pull or on-demand Oracle. So natively, the Oracle keep updating all price feeds we have 2 to 3 times per second. Then it's up to the end user, aka protocol, to trigger price updates by themselves. So whether you're PubDex, trigger every block, whether you're money market, every hour, you can free ride. But first, having a pool model, the Oracle doesn't pay the gas cost. And second, you can actually charge the guy that requests, trigger the price update for a fee. So arguably on-demand Oracle or pool Oracles, the only on-chain way you could monetize an Oracle, apart from going to sign deals directly with apps. And the second, who pays? And we saw with the latest flash crash, as a push Oracle, am I going to spend 10 ETH to send the price update of ETH? Should I spend 50 grand? Maybe not 50 grand, but 50 grand to update a price for free for it to be free ridden? It makes no sense. As a protocol, I know that I'm willing to pay that amount, because I know that I could have $1 billion bad debt if I don't get a price update. So having the ability to trigger false update, a price Oracle update is actually, I think it's the biggest use case I have for on-demand Oracle. You don't trust the Oracle that they'll be willing to spend so much money to save you from bad debt while you could force it yourself. So I think it's like most push Oracle ends up like launching their kind of on-demand stuff also for derivatives, but it's the worst economics possible. It works for a bit, and that's why you even like update price every hour, 1%. It's just like cost minimization.
Anyone else with thoughts on that one?
I guess there's a brief mention is that OEV is an interesting area that we've been trying out on Compound, which I think it's a bit overhyped, but it's also one of those things that if you're leaving money on the table, you have to at least explore it. So we've been trialing it out with Chainlink SVR, and it's one of those challenging things where it's like an oracle. It's like you don't know it's working well until it's actually been tested in some unforeseen scenario. So we were actually very close to ending our test run and considering deploying it further. When we had like massive liquidation events that happened over the last month or so. So we were like, okay, great, perfect test case. It actually ended up working out pretty well using Chainlink's SVR. We've also played around with API 3 and Redstone's versions. But what we learned is like, one, the revenue extraction is not always going to be as good, but two, like it's not, honestly, the biggest problem with those sort of methodologies is that you're so reliant on third parties, like the people that are actually going to be doing the searching, that like it kind of becomes something where if you don't go big all at once, they're not going to bother showing up. They're like, if you're only trialing out one market, they're like, well, that's not enough for us to care showing up for. So that was just like an interesting thing that we had to learn a lot about OEV over the last year when it was still very new, and then Aave doing it kind of made it somewhat okay for everyone else to start experimenting with it. But until then, it felt very risky because at the end of the day, when you're doing lending markets or anything related to that, if you're doing anything to complicate the Oracle price component, you might be taking a lot of risk. So it seems to be working so far. I haven't seen any big failures of SVR yet, or OEV in general. Hopefully it stays that way. It did well over liquidation season, but hopefully that continues going forward.
It's great. RFQ for liquidations, I mean, it's kind of the same. It's just everyone overestimate numbers.
Yeah, it's not going to bring you like massive windfall in revenue. I think we saw that from like before this was implemented. Of course, once you implement it, the profits go down.
I think also two things. Push versus pull, I think that Chainlink technically has to update it because of the trust level, if we say it that way, because the brand is like, everything is liquidated in Chainlink. I'm using it just as the largest name, like didn't update the price feed. But the second piece, and I agree, by the way, the pull one is you're sure it's going to happen here. You're trusting that the brand name is more important than anything else. So I agree on the pull comment that you said. But the second thing is we're also talking here mostly about price feeds. If you recall, Oracle's, the idea was also I can request the weather because I'm betting with my friend on weather. The thing is that, yes, most of the money in DeFi Oracle, or most of the money Oracles make, I don't run an Oracle company, but I'm guessing is from DeFi, and that's it. Nobody earns money from getting the weather information. But as we do see more stuff coming on chain, you are going to have this esoteric request of like, hey, I am requesting to know who owns this building, and then something goes to search somewhere and returns the information 50 blocks later. 2 hours later, like a person had to go through the papers and submit the request. There's definitely going to be revenue sources there as well. So I think that we now equate oracles to price feeds, but it's more than that.
Yeah, I guess Marc and Brenda, have you guys seen any interesting use cases outside of price feeds?
No, not so much. Recently, like, what was it, 3 months ago? I guess it was, we'll give them credit to Chainlink and the Pyth network. Like, we had an announcement with like Department of
that's what I had in mind, actually.
Economy.
I was setting DOC,
Department of Commerce,
Department of Commerce. I should have reread the blog before. Where now we pretty much like publishers or nodes, depending in which Oracle verbiage you use, got access to government official data through centralized API. So it's not so much, it's data redistribution on chain. Has this data been used? We could check, do a few Dune queries. I think there might have been 10, 20 price update on chain for this. But it was mostly people testing. So if you overall, outside of pricing, you won't get much things. And most recently, we announced like with Kalshi. So you can get like the probabilities of Kalshi on chain, and we don't have the whole Kalshi catalog. There is some usage, but compared to DeFi, like pure DeFi pricing stuff, it's irrelevant, I think.
But it opens up new possibilities. So whenever the Department of Commerce lies on the jobs reports, I can come be Pyth. How did you let
not
this
really,
happen?
not really, because you're just pushing exactly the data that they already created. So you cannot be an oversight if you're just pushing their data.
Exactly.
It has to be, if you wanted to do that, you would have to actually create an independent measure of macro
But I
measure.
always blame the first thing in my stack. I don't look any further than that.
Right, right. But on that, actually, before this came straight from or as a supposed partnership, Ampleforth has been using the CPI to adjust their token or rebase their token on a daily basis for years now. And they use Chainlink us and themselves, and they do the median, and it happens every day at 8 p.m. I'm hoping that there are other, other ways that we can use this information. It's very useful. Now, I would prefer it if it was completely done independently and it acted as oversight rather than just pushing the same information on chain. But
So we should
that would
launch
be interesting.
a census at the Pyth network. We're going to go collect all the economic data.
A bit back. Yeah.
No, that is something that actually we've been thinking about for quite a while. My background is in economics. I actually work for the Bureau of Labor Statistics doing some employment statistics and producer price index statistics. And I think it's fairly doable, especially now that a lot of the commerce has moved on chain after the 2020 pandemic. A lot of this information can be collected. But
Quickly back to OEV. Do you think OEV creates a negative incentive for lending platforms to create more liquidations?
Yes. I think it's very. I think in practice, most lending protocols are smart enough not to go, if they're implementing OEV, to not like fall into those incentives or use let that drive their liquidation design. But it's absolutely, as soon as it came up, it was like it's kind of like credit cards like making bonuses off of people defaulting. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of problems with that being the financial incentive. I mean, luckily, we're not seeing a lot of revenue from OAV, at least not as much as the OAV providers projected for us and their fancy charts. But in practice, I think that it's the sort of thing we have to watch carefully as it evolves. Like if we see lending protocol, I see it as an add-on. If someone sees OEV as like a differentiator for the lending market, then I would be worried of you're actually engineering for this to be a revenue source. Okay, that's a problem.
How do you engineer? Are they selling the coins to trigger liquidations? Or are they taking more risky parameters?
The data lags.
Well, lending protocols usually, when they're being sold on this, they're taking it the protocol itself will receive a cut as part of the protocol fees from OEV liquidation. So, the more liquidations that happen, the more you get paid. Versus usually, there's already usually a fee that's getting paid for liquidations, but that's usually all going to the liquidator. So it does create that incentive, and I have to honestly go back and remember the math we looked at 6 months ago about how that would end up playing out.
alternatively, we can just hard code it and no liquidations will be allowed if even if it depegs or even if it.
All right, I know we have a little over 5 minutes here. 5 years from now, what is the global source of truth? Native on-chain data, off-chain data published on-chain, or just off-chain data?
I don't want to pop anybody's fantasy, but it's going to continue to be a mix, especially as RWAs enter the space. There is no way. I think it's going to be a mix, but that's just me being very biased, maybe.
The best example, I agree with the mix, especially for markets. And I think perfect example, yet a bit early, is what Superstate's doing. So you have all this RWA, all this tokenization. One thing I think Superstate is doing very well compared to the other, they technically don't tokenize stuff. It's they issue actual shares on chain. It's token, like crypto tokens, you said, but it's actual shares. It's not a tokenized version where you have no rights. And as we talked to Superstate, it was like, okay, I don't know, they have tokenized the bad word. They've issued Galaxy shares on chain. And their first question was, all right, you have a Pyth equity Galaxy price feeds, like price from NYSE and all the, from publishers where it trades. The first question was, what volume is necessary for this, on-chain issued Galaxy share to be incorporated into the actual equity, the general, Galaxy equity price. So I think we're on this path where like markets both going to be off and on chain.
I mean, my answer is most compute in the world is still on-prem, not cloud. It's going to take 40 years. No, I know it sounds pessimistic, but like humans are slow, especially in large groups. So I hope like in 5 years I'm majorly wrong and I will bet against or for myself on Polymarket, but I think it's going to take a very, very, very long time to publish all of this data.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything already said. I think my hope is that we do have more on-chain issuance where like an asset isn't just like tokenized and put on chain like RWAs, but it like lives natively on chain, and we start to see, especially like we have a friendlier SEC now that's actually willing to experiment and like allow people to do things that like would be proper securities without necessarily needing to go through all of like the paper and legacy ways of doing things. So I'd love to see securities that are natively issued on chain, something doing an APO that's entirely on chain. That I don't think we're there yet, but I do think that like in 5 years it's feasible for there to be enough potential liquidity there. Now it might not be like the biggest IPO ever, but there might be areas where people are willing to go down that route more and more for the accessibility and the fact that they could probably do it on chain earlier than if they went through the normal like NASDAQ listing. But it's not just like a token offering, which anyone can do now with the right lawyer, but like something that is going to actually represent real equity and property rights.
And one more point, we're talking a lot about how it's going to be mixed because we're seeing more equities and things being tokenized, but also it works the other way. I think most people that launch a token, once it grows or it has enough liquidity and it has enough growth, it goes to like the majority of the liquidity moves to a centralized exchange. And so then you actually need to go get your, because that's where price discovery is happening. So that's one of the reasons I think it goes both ways, that it's going to be very hard, especially 5 years. I think we're still going to be doing a mix.
Does more data being originated from on-chain create issues for oracles? Like, do you guys kind of thrive? Does an oracle thrive when you're aggregating off-chain information, or there's an off-chain kind of aggregation layer? Like we were talking about this example, how Uniswap, right? Like using the Uniswap oracle didn't work, but what if it did? Like what if it gets to a size where they have the capacity and volatility? Obviously, there's like easily manipulatable. What if we get into a point where there is enough robust on-chain data that you don't need to pipe in off-chain data? And have a way to represent it? How do oracles kind of respond there?
I think that's the dream. I mean, so our first startup was actually financial derivatives, and we landed on infrastructure because it didn't exist at the time. And if it were to happen, I think I would be thrilled about it, because then we could build something that is actually more transparent. Obviously, then we can start talking about privacy and things like that. But in general, if there's enough liquidity and enough price discovery happening on chain, then that will be a healthy market to be able to reference.
I think it's already the case. Many tokens, 99.9% only trade on chain, like any LSTs. And there's nothing funnier, NFA, but a bit of FA. Look at centralized exchanges that have LSTs. You can put the worst bids and asks, and it'll be easy profit for you because their books are empty, because all the liquidity is on chain. So the problem is just too much data or too much fragmentation. And I think where we're going to, train towards is more customizability. As in, I'm a money market, I can only liquidate on chain. I cannot go on Binance and just dump my ETH. So it'll be, I can only trade here, just give me a flavor, a mesh of all where I can liquidate. Your derivatives protocol, it's all synthetic. You should care about the turbo global price, whether it's on-chain or off-chain. So I think you have a sweet spot of too little data, nightmare, you can price it. Too much, nightmare, as you're kind of mixing so many things that aren't one-to-one.
I think you have oracles in normal trading as well. People look at news articles, sentiments, people look at all of this stuff. Inevitably, we live in the real world, and no matter where stuff happens, we're still going to need information from the real world. The weather is always going to be there, and I hope somebody builds an app that uses Oracle weather data. No, but jokes aside, even if we move literally everything on chain and all of the logic is happening there, there is still stuff that's not going to happen on chain by definition of our existence. So I think that that you guys aren't screwed long term. I really think that you're going to exist. It's just going to be Celsius and Fahrenheit, not like USD value. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the one caveat that would be interesting is like once we get to where everything's on chain, I think we have to have some form of privacy on chain, which creates some interesting wrinkles for how you get price data. And there could be some interesting avenues of like, okay, oracles, instead of functioning as just like relaying information, are actually doing kind of functioning the same way we talk about like ZK proofs functioning, of like providing answers based on data that can't be fully revealed. I think there's a lot of interesting areas where that could go, but it's hard to say because we don't have a lot of practical privacy on chain beyond payments.
Cool. And that's all we got. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll all be around.